Hi guys and welcome back to SwitchUp. I'm Mark Walker and thanks to Koei Tecmo for providing the review copy. Remember, we give away a free game each month to the subscriber most active and engaged on the channel. We've given over 30 games away so far this year. Now Warriors Orochi 4 is finally here. I can still picture my fresh-faced 13-year-old self playing Dynasty Warriors on the PlayStation, blown away by the sheer numbers of on-screen enemies, the feeling of single-handedly turning the tides of battle, but equally the repetition and confusing stories that perpetuated those experiences. So it's been about 20 years since I last took control of Liu Bei. Surely it must be time to dust off the katana, don my armor and head out into the battlefield one more time. Let's find out. The heroes from across the Dynasty and Samurai Warriors universe, all 170 of them, find themselves thrust together in an unknown time and place. One by one, the forces of these scattered factions join together, cowed by the mysteriously powerful Nobunaga, who seems to have harnessed the power of one of 8 mysterious bracelets. Soon though, it becomes apparent the king of the gods himself, Zeus, is behind everything. Why has he reformed this parallel world to begin with, and perhaps more importantly, why are any of you there? Now, the story unfolds through some typically over-the-top characterization, where the feudal leaders' over-dramatized interactions play out. There are a number within combat as well, where story is fleshed out, but I found it difficult to read these and concentrate on the 500 guys trying to smash my face in. A nice and interesting use of fleshing out the experience with the entirely optional story interactions between your ever-growing roster of characters. These are typically Japanese, in that some of the translations are just downright strange, awkward even. However, there is a real playful charm to them that I enjoyed. Plus they do serve a very real function within the gameplay mechanics, which I'll go into in the next section. As you would expect from a Musou title with this many characters, interactions between them can feel a little forced. In fact, much of the story feels like an excuse simply to bring as many different characters from across these 3 series into the game. Let's not kid ourselves, that's exactly what it is. And despite some slightly confusing dialogue choices, the story is delivered with a breakneck confident abandon, and its ever youthful heroes do a good job of making it enjoyable. It scores 15 out of 20. Since I left the series 20 odd years ago, every single aspect of the game has been improved, and here's how. Let's start with combat. Jumping into the single player sortie mode, you're given story missions to undertake. While looking familiar to me as I charged out into the battlefield, the usual light attacks sending the clone armies of the Shu clan scattered, that is about as much similarity as I could find. You create a squad of 3 heroes, of which you eventually unlock 170, which is an insane amount, bearing in mind every single one of them controls slightly differently. During battle, pressing the triggers will change between these 3 characters, with those in reserve, so to speak, regaining health. Rather than simply changing those randomly though, you're encouraged to chain attacks mid-combat in several ways. This means you can string an almost continuous and unrelenting barrage of attacks on your enemy, particularly useful when facing another general. While blocking can be performed, I found offense to be the best defense. Each attack charges your Musou meter, something I remember from the old games, and when full this can be triggered to unleash your character's devastating moves. The Samurai and Warrior Orochi characters actually have slightly different movesets, but I won't go into all the intricacies of these. Needless to say, it's just one more bit of depth to an otherwise already deep game. Next up is the magic system, totally new to me. This allows for a standard magical attack, once again unique to every player. You can unleash the full force of your magic by holding RB and A, but the sweetest magical attack comes from every one of your team combining their full charges to devastating effect. You can summon a steed in an instant, which makes backtracking and changing your gameplay on the fly a little more bearable. While combat can be very button bash heavy, to begin with, obviously it's a hack and slash, the intricacies of the many systems when learned allow for a much more controlled play experience. Quite literally, after an hour or 2, you'll be an unstoppable killing machine. Some enemies will require the use of magic to defeat them, shielded as they are, so being adept with all the systems will make the play experience much more enjoyable. I would suggest playing on hard mode though, as the default for me was just a little bit too easily cheesed and can feel a little like one of those 1000°C knife videos, except through an army instead of some random household object. The map provides useful information, which can be key when you push too deep into enemy territory only to be flanked by an enemy general and must sprint to your allies' aid. Now, dialogue is intended to assist you during battle, but unfortunately due to the Japanese voice acting, it can be very difficult to read these while also juggling 300 on-screen enemies, which is a shame. I did force myself to read as much as I could in these sections, as they had humour, story and some points of advice. Outside of combat are where most of the real surprises were for me. In sortie mode, you can take your warriors online and fight with friends or strangers around the world. Now, I did manage to get onto one online game, but there was only one other player in there, and it was a kind of capture the flag style. I couldn't enjoy the main meat of the online game yet because there wasn't anyone else playing online. Local co-op play via split screen with another player is quite seamless and would be a worthwhile addition to our top co-op games list we just made. Much like an RPG, officers you've fought with earn experience points which can be spent on new skills, of which a good number are available. Skill orbs earned in combat can also be exchanged for points to spend here. The game feels very much more RPG in this regard, and becoming attached to a character can result in some immensely powerful ones. Through play, you also acquire gems and growth points. The latter are used to manually upgrade the character's base level without the need for combat, but they are best saved to be used strategically when the need arises. I mentioned in the story section that you have optional story dialogues that can be accessed in the character selection screen by pressing Y. They serve to show you the characters which may work well together. When you create a party of these, they share an affinity with each other that improves their stats overall. This is a lovely idea, and it feels more like a FIFA game where the players may or may not work well together, and it adds an element of strategy to proceedings. Just having this kept me changing players to find that dream team on the battlefield. Plus, you can add a horse into the mix, of which you'll find many on your adventures. Each round you'll earn weapons for your fighters with the addition of some lottery weapons that randomly drop. These may have magical abilities such as fire or water, with the others being easily sold. You can fuse several weapons to join favourable abilities or dismantle them to retrieve gems and special attributes to be used later. The game is absolutely ram-packed with content, and I haven't even got onto the battle mode, which pits you in a capture the flag style online match, or the crystals and big star weapons, but there is such a wealth of depth to the game you could quite literally spend thousands of hours here. While combat is vastly improved over my earlier experiences, games have always and still do struggle with repetition. This is somewhat negated with the sheer quantity of things to do, but it's still there. Being able to join a friend though, and the exhilaration of finding a winning formula are fantastic. Gameplay for me scores 17 out of 20. It gets an extra point for the ability to essentially just pass a Joy-Con to a mate and enjoy the whole experience in jolly cooperation. Visually, the game has a lot going for it. Huge battles with hundreds of on-screen foes and some truly spectacular special moves and magical abilities. It does run okay on Switch in single player with the occasional frame drops, and although it seems a little far from 60 frames per second, there are pop-ins and flat textures which have always plagued the series. They don't really detract from the experience too much, but the aging engine is really beginning to show its wrinkles. Cutscenes look delightful, but the character design is the real star of the show. Each and every one of your ensemble has a unique, handcrafted aesthetic that is the result of several decades of refinement. Some eye-popping special effects also do a number on performance, but the biggest hit comes when you switch to co-op play. I would estimate maybe 20 to 30%. Which, while initially jarring, actually doesn't affect the gameplay too much. Controls remain responsive and tight. In handheld mode, the game clearly takes another visual hit, and frame rates again are slightly lowered. In a game where there may be literally hundreds or thousands of on-screen enemies though, it does an admirable job on what is essentially a handheld tablet. Load times are a little long, but when in combat everything ticks over nicely. Visuals score 14 out of 20. How best to describe audio? It was as if they managed to distill and bottle adrenaline. The battle music thumps relentlessly in the background and fits the on-screen carnage perfectly. but it never really does any more than that. There are times where it can grow a little wearing, where in a film there would be calm moments that serve to make the combat more poignant. Orochi just bombards your senses when in combat, and a dynamic musical score, a touch more advanced than this, would have worked really nicely. Weapons and magical attacks do sound really nice, especially the special moves where your team comes together, and speech is voiced in typically flamboyant fashion. For me, audio scores 15 out of 20. The game costs £54.99 or $59.99, so really, if you're going to buy this one, you're going to want to pick it up from the US eShop. This one is most definitely aimed at the premium end of the market and sits at the top in this regard. Thankfully, it is absolutely jam-packed to the rafters with content. A single character would take several dozen hours to level and craft with the weapons and abilities you like, but here, as I've said, there are hundreds of them. Add in the near infinite party creation possibilities, online and co-op play, free battle modes, and a vast campaign. Content isn't an issue here. All that said, the price is still high, but I can't knock the developer for that when there is this much crammed into the game. It's quite unbelievable how much there is. Despite the high price to entry, for me value still scores an excellent 17 out of 20. Whether you play solo or in co-op, there's a lot to enjoy in Warriors Orochi 4. It has that same addictiveness I remember as a child, but with all the additional RPG strategy elements I so longed for at the time. It isn't perfect by any means, and the in-combat strategy feels very limited at best, but it is very fun, and once you master it, it becomes hugely addictive. It scores an overall SwitchUp score of 78%, another solid entry into a beloved series with a few performance hiccups. Many thanks to Koei Tecmo for the review copy. Be sure to check out our other reviews for all things Switch all the time. Keep it Switch up. See ya!